Now, as Zimbabwe gears up to assume rotational chairship of SADC, the Southern African nation's economy is in dire state as the repressions of the opposition continues. Louw Nel, who's senior political analyst at Oxford Economics Africa, joins us with greater perspective on the political wranglings that are taking place ahead of that chairship. Louw, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, Louw, we do know that the Zimbabwean economy is battling now quite a severe drought, but we also know that they're about to take this chairpersonship of SADC. Could that, assist them in getting some external support from bilaterals and multilaterals, that chairpersonship?
Well, firstly, it's fortuitous for Zimbabwe to be taking over the chairmanship of the SADC bloc at the moment. It's Angola currently who's the chair. So a summit will take place in Harare in August, and they'll take over. It certainly helps, but it also puts SADC in a very awkward position because you'll recall last year with the election, the SADC election observer mission was very critical of the Zimbabwean election. It was headed by former Vice President of Zambia, Nevis Mumba, who I think was strategically chosen by President Hichilema, which you'll recall was an opposition leader who then became president in Zambia. So that mission was probably always going to be a bit more critical than other missions. But it was a very critical report presented to SADC, and SADC has really done nothing about it. And I don't think there's any reason to think that the agenda in August is going to include the Zimbabwean election. But it is one of those issues that the bloc needs to deal with, but certainly has chosen not to. But at the same time, in March, the US renewed its sanctions regime against Zimbabwe. It converted it ever so slightly to make it less specific to the country and more specific to individuals. So suddenly you had, by the Magnitsky Act, you had President Mnangagwa and his wife, Vice President Chiwenga, former state security ministers, individuals like that singled out. They were already sanctioned as such. So in essence, the changing of that regime, of the sanctions regime, was a slight rollback from what the US had done before. And so all of these things, I guess, contribute towards Zimbabwe's efforts to try and rejoin the international community as a paid-up member. And the SADC chairmanship will only help.
Looking at the internal politics there in Zimbabwe, we also know that, the leader of the opposition, that's the Citizens Coalition for Change, I think his name is Jameson Timber, and a few other people who were gathered at his home were arrested. And I guess that also puts into question issues around the political there in Zimbabwe. Why was arrested, and, of course, the people who were gathered in his home, Louw?
Well, I should mention that Jameson Timber is described by the CCC as their chief administrator. There's some confusion about who exactly runs the party at the moment. You recall that Nelson Chamisa threw in the towel in January, and effectively after all those shenanigans with their lawmakers being recalled and things like that, he eventually decided he just couldn't do it anymore. So the CCC still exists as an opposition. It's still the largest opposition party in the country. And even though it has been hollowed out by ZANU-PF, familiar way of doing it, they're leaving nothing up to chance. And I think they are quite concerned about potentially being embarrassed in August with the summit. And so on July 14th, I beg your pardon, Mr. Timber and a large group of people, mostly young people, were gathered at his home in Avondale in Harare. It is private residence. Can't imagine anything wrong with that. Of course, the ZRP shows up. They tell him it's an illegal gathering, and it turns violent. All these individuals get thrown on the back of a truck. They appear in court a week later in terrible shape. There was a gentleman with a prosthetic leg that was broken. There was another lady whose leg was broken in the melee, who had to be carried into the courtroom on the back of a co-accused. Terrible scenes. And Mr. Timber himself, of course, is a 17-year-old man. He looked terribly disheveled. And so the bail application was last week Thursday, and it was denied. And these individuals are now being charged with the usual, gathering, plotting, civil unrest, that sort of thing. It really doesn't bode well for Zimbabwean democracy, but again, it just shows you that the regime is not letting up on the opposition. Even though the opposition has been defanged again, they will still crack down and they will still brutalize these individuals. There are some individuals, senior members of the CCC at the moment, are on the run because apparently they're being sought by the CIO, the feared intelligence agency. And so this climate of fear and this violent pushback by the regime continues. And very much, I think, it's because they want the summit to be smooth sailing, There don't want to be any issues. There was a lady who was protesting outside the court, asking for her husband to be released on bail, and she was summarily arrested. And so that sort of thing is that what they're trying to avoid.
And you have said that the SADC observer mission was critical of the Zimbabwean election. Of course, we have this summit coming up in the month of August, Louw. And I'm just wondering here just about maybe SADC and its ability to call this stuff out, the stuff that you're saying, people being arrested, denied bail, the strength of SADC and the ability for me to say, well, Louw, I don't like how you're behaving. It's undemocratic and the likes. Do we have that strength within the organization?
Well, often with these things, the first step is to even get it on the agenda. And we'll have to see whether or not Zimbabwe even makes it onto the agenda. Previous summits, Zim was discussed, but they never really dug into it. It may have to do with the fact that President Lorenzo from Angola wasn't keen on this sort of thing being discussed at the bloc. They, after all, a year before that, had a dubious election of their own. And we do see these administrations across the country, often the ones led by liberation movements, who don't want to call out ZANU-PF. We really just want to keep things sweet. And so it then falls to individuals like President Ishilema from Zambia and individuals like that to kind of go, look, we do have to discuss these things. It can't carry on like this. We can't keep having stolen elections over and over and over again. As SADC, we have responsibility. But we also know that SADC has got other priorities that they will have to discuss. They have a multilateral force in the DRC at the moment. Most of them being South African troops, of course. They're suffering massive casualties. That deployment, I think, will probably be the main topic of discussion for SADC. But we might see other issues then bump Zimbabwe off the agenda. And I'm sure that Mr. Mnangagwa would like nothing more.
Well, I hope we can touch base after that summer just to really unpack the most important takeouts from it. Always a pleasure having you here on Business Day TV. Thank you so much for your time. That was Louw Nel, Senior Political Analyst at Oxford Economics Africa.